You got to operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the 2023 offensive position groups, and I'll tell you which ones I believe will be better or worse this season. And before we begin, let's take a look at the roadmap going forward for the podcast, at least until the season begins. So, this is being released on July 27th, which is a Thursday, and that means we are 5 weeks out from Gator football. So, this week, what are we going to do? We're going to take a look at the offense, and I'll tell you which is better or worse, as I've said. Next week, it'll be the defense's turn, and also a little of special teams. Then the following week, we will take a look at the first 6 games, possibly first 7 games, depending on whether or not I take it to the bye week or not. Since we do have a few cupcakes in the first 6 games, maybe I'll take some time, do the 7th game. That way we can put a little bit more time on the 5 big games at the end of the season. Following the last 5 or 6 games of the season, I will do things I want to see in 2023. Last year I did that in 2022. We saw some of them, and some of them we did not. And then finally, after that episode, we will have the preview for the Utah game, and the season will be here. So let's go ahead and get into the 2023 offense. To best look at the 2023 offense, I believe we need to look at the framework for the 2022 offense and see what stats we had, what we did good at, what we did not do good at, to see, can we be better or worse in this area? Where can we grow? And what are some of the things that we can look for in this Gators offense moving forward? Well, in 2022, we were 57th in the nation with 29.5 points per game. Of the 12 FBS opponents we played last season, 6 of them were higher in points per game, and 29.5 seems like it's a pretty good number. But I want to put out there that the 4 playoff teams were in the top 9, the lowest of which, and I believe it was TCU, had 38.8 points per game. So that's something we want to try and achieve, getting higher in those points per game. 29.5, again, not terrible, but definitely something we could do better. And then yards per game. We're 37th in the nation at 424.1 yards per game. We averaged 200.2 rushing yards per game, which was good for 24th in the nation. Passing, we are only 77th in the nation, and that was with 223.8 passing yards. Other statistics I think were interesting looking at 2022 that kind of will guide map where we're going. We're 50th in the nation on third down conversions with only 40.5% converted. And on fourth downs, we're 91st in the nation with 44.1%. So less than half on fourth downs. We did go from a decent amount in 34 attempts. And I looked at the number of attempts because I thought maybe our percentage was so low because we had so many attempts. Tennessee had 33 attempts and had a better percentage. And there are teams that were in the 50s and 60s. I don't believe we were in the top 15 teams number of attempts. But there were some things we did last year that kind of hampered us in that. And there are things that we could do this year to get better in that, such as some predictability. Speaking of predictability, we were 119th out of 131 teams in the nation in red zone scoring last year. We only converted on 75% of our trips to the red zone. And part of that is tied to the fourth down conversion rate, because there are times we're inside the 20 that we go for it on fourth down and we just would not convert. So if we can get both those numbers up, it will be a much better season for the Gators. One thing I found interesting having to do with red zone scoring, as I was looking at different split stats for and what that means, if you don't know, ESPN, other places, you can look and see how a quarterback, for example, did on like 3rd and 1, 3rd and goal, all over the place, all sorts of stats. I happen to run across this when looking at some stats. Last year, if you combined all first, second, and third and goals, so every first and goal we had on offense, every second and goal, and every third and goal, we only threw 9 or 10 passes. And the reason I can't say for sure is one place in the stats it says AR threw 8, one place it says he threw 9, and I know that Miller only threw 1 in the bowl game. With that said, maybe we were too predictable on the run in the first, second, and goal situations. We did not throw at all on a 4th and goal situation. And some of that is maybe we called a pass play and AR pulled it down and ran it in for a touchdown, which he did score several rushing touchdowns and some of them close. And I know there's some thought, well, we could never throw the ball in from that short. He threw either a touchdown or a 2-point conversion against Kentucky to Trevor Etienne. That was in that 2-3 yard range. And then he also had that great 2-point conversion where he faked out Mahmoud Diabate and another Utah linebacker, did the little jump spin, ran and threw it to Jaquavion Frazier's in the corner, wide open. So there were opportunities. We just didn't do that. And I think if we're so predictable that if we add up all these first, second, and third and goals and only throughout 13 games, 9 or 10 times, well, defenses are going to sell out on the run. And if you're selling out on the run and, well, the other team's mostly running, that's going to be a win for the defense. But those are things that perhaps the teams looked into and will try and get better moving forward. So let's go ahead and get to our first position group, which I believe is the most important, impactful position group for our 2023 season, and that is the offensive line. Currently, I do believe our offensive line will be worse this season than last season, just comparatively. And part of that is just experience. It's nothing really against these players. I do want to say that if I say a position group may be worse this season, there are reasons for it, not because I don't like them. And I hope I'm wrong about these, but there are logical reasons to think it may not be as good as last year. So, our offensive line was decent last year. There are things they did great. There are times they did not do too well. And I'll discuss that when discussing other position groups. But we are replacing 3.5 starters. Some places will say 4 starters. However, Austin Barber, who had 5 starts last year in our 13 games, I will give him that half nod as a starter. He and Kingsley Egwekin, who started the past 26 games at center, do return. Barber's moving from right tackle to left tackle. So with that, even if we said just 2 starters return, now it's about who's coming in. Well, the first position to look at is the tackle position opposite Barber over at right tackle. And of course, Barber moving to left tackle is to replace Richard Garage, who had 42 starts for the Gators, most of those at the left tackle position. And possible starters are Damian George, who came from Alabama, who started a few games due to injury in 2021, but then fell out of favor, only had 20 offensive snaps last year for Alabama. Saban did recently, I believe it was at Media Days, did say George was one of the most talented players on his team. I think that might have been him talking up one of his former players, because I don't know how you give the most talented player on your team only 20 offensive snaps. But one good thing is, coming from Alabama, that means he practiced against Alabama talent. And when he did play, he generally played SEC schedule and does give us experience. Do I know whether or not he'll be as good as Garage was generally last year? I do not. And so there's a little bit of a question there. Another guy that could start is Hudson, who came over from Florida International, and he is a multi-year starter. However, last season he did have some back injuries, which caused him to play inconsistently. And by that, he didn't play as much or as many snaps as he had in the prior years. If he's healthy, he could definitely be a great depth piece and maybe step up and be the starting tackle. Moving to the guard positions, we've got to replace both guards. The first one we have to replace is All American Osiris Torrance, who was a preseason All American and an end of season All American last year for the Gators, and Ethan White, who was a second team All SEC guard and had started several seasons for the Gators. So these are two guys with lots of experience that now we're replacing. We're talking about an All American and a second team All SEC guy. So when I say guys, I'm not sure if they'll be better. It's because that's the standard that we're comparing to for last year. The first guy that's coming in to replace one of the guard positions is Micah Maskua, who transferred to us from Baylor. He was a honorable mention all Big 12 guy last year at guard for the Bears. However, he got injured in the spring. He's not cleared yet, or at least he wasn't last week at SEC Media Days when Billy Napier was asked. But Billy Napier thinks he'll be cleared soon. The question is, how healthy will he be at the beginning of the season? Like Cam Rising. If Cam Rising's clear for our game at Utah, a lot of people said, well, their quarterback, Cam Rising, won't be 100%. Well, I'm not sure that our guy with an injury from the spring who had surgery, and if he gets cleared mid-August, I'm not sure he'll be at 100%. So it'll be something interesting to watch. He is a very good, actually, Pro Football Focus rated him higher at run blocking than they did Ethan White, so that's good. His pass blocking left some to be desired, and that was again against Big 12 defenses against the SEC. So there are some questions there, but overall, I think he could fill into Ethan White's role or Osiris Torrance's role quite nicely. I'm just not sure if he's quite the ceiling of a Osiris Torrance, but I believe he could definitely take over for Ethan White. So then the other position is Leonard, who's been here several years. He's got 2 starts with the program. He's been overall solid in his replacements. Last year had a difficult time against LSU, but then again in other games he did quite well at the guard in a relief role. But behind them, our depth is a bunch of unproven guys, which doesn't mean they're bad. But when last year you had Osiris Torrance, Ethan White, and behind them you had guys like Leonard who had plenty of experience, kind of with that lack of depth, that's what makes me believe this line will be worse. And with a lower ceiling, at least on some of these players, I don't know if it'll be quite as good as last year, but there are things we can do that I talked about prior to the spring game that we could do to help them out, such as quick passes. So, and what I mean by that is one step drop passes. So ball snapped, balls out. And so things like quick slants, some decent screens, things like that that could back off blitzes and other pressures that we didn't see too much last season, even in the bowl game when you had teams. And Vandy did this, Oregon State did in the bowl game just for illustration purposes, where they would stack the box against the run. And if we're not making them pay for stack the box, they're going to continue to do it. And it's going to make our offensive line look worse than it is. In fact, in the spring game, we did this a decent amount. Moving on to the tight end position, this is one I do think will be better. Dante Zanders returns. It's his 3rd season at tight end for the Gators. Of course, his first season was way back in 2018, 2019 in there. And they moved to defense and then came back last year to the tight end position. Odom also returns. He played more towards the end of the season last year, but has that experience. He played in the SEC, played against FSU, played in the bowl game, and just getting that second season of continuity from those guys will be better. Unfortunately, Keon Zipper has probably missed the season due to injury. He's a guy that last year I thought was looking decent at the beginning of the season, had a phenomenal touchdown catch and run against Tennessee. Also, we have redshirt freshman Arliss Boardingham, Hayden Hansen. Those are guys, again, they've been in the system for a year. So we've got 4 or 5 guys that have been in the system, all returning, guys that have different skill sets. Boardingham is more of a passing catcher guy, kind of a mismatch. Hansen's a little bit in between. Xanders, of course, has the years of experience, and Odom, of course, last year did good things. So with all of those returning from year 1 of Billy Napier to year 2 in the system, I do believe that is a net positive and will be better next season. Moving to the 2023 wide receiver position, I do think that's going to be a push, and that's because it relies on O-line play and also on our QB play. We do only return 1 regular starter in Ricky Pearsall. Xavier Henderson has transferred after spring. We also lost Justin Shorter. We've lost Trent Whittemore and several other players. However, we do return a guy like Jaquavian Frazier's, who, as I spoke about earlier, had that big 2-point conversion catch against Utah. And Frazier's also had an excellent touchdown catch against the Aggies at Texas A&M and got injured on the play and unfortunately didn't play the rest of the season. But he can make big catches. He's a guy who I think more time is only going to help him. He's one of the few guys that has played for Billy Gonzalez before the season. Another guy who's done that is Marcus Burke, who had an excellent spring game. This guy made one of the best catches I've seen a Gator player make in years in the spring game when he caught the ball around the back. I believe it was Jakeem Jackson. Basically, if you've not seen it, go find a replay of this. The ball comes and defenders facing him, and he's got his arms wrapped around the defender and catches the ball in the defender's back. Excellent, excellent. Guy may be ready to break out. Caleb Douglas, Ty Chow Bowman. I pronounced that wrong. I apologize. But anyways, Ty Bowman, Caleb Douglas both played plenty last year. Both were mixed bags, did some great things, did some bad things, had some issue with drops, but overall not bad. And then we've got a few true freshmen coming in with lots of speed and potential, and those are Andy Jean, Aiden Mizell, and of course Wilson. Jean and Mizell were here in the spring. Jean's got some really smooth routes. Mizell's got burning speed, caused a few pass interferences in the spring game where he was being tackled because he was getting behind the defense, and rather than give up the deep touchdown, let's tackle him before he does. And that is speed, which cannot be taught. Wilson, looking at his high school tapes, is a very shifty, very fast guy. So these guys bring a different dimension we didn't have last year in the amount of speed to go along with Pearsall. And with that, that could open up more things with the offense if the O-line can give the quarterback time and if the quarterback can hit them in stride and if the quarterback can deliver the ball, something that was inconsistent last year. Let's go ahead and take a look at the running backs. This one I'm predicting is also a push. I do believe that the excellent duo of Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne should be better this year. And even Cam Carroll, who I thought looked great in the spring game, transferred from Tulane, I think he might be better. But will they be more productive? And why? And that's why it's a push, and that's because it's dependent on offensive line play and quarterback play, kind of like I said for the receivers, because if that offensive line isn't opening holes, if the quarterback's not forcing the defense to respect the passing game, well, then these guys are going to have the same problems they had last year against Tennessee, last year against LSU, Georgia, Vandy, Oregon State. All those games, they averaged under 4 yards per carry, some under 3. Johnson did average over 4 yards per carry against LSU, but 12 of his 13 runs averaged 1.5 yards per carry. Then he broke off a 42-yard touchdown, which that's good. But as we talked about in the LSU game, if you're having 12 runs for 1.5 yards per carry, those are 12 wasted plays when you're only getting about 60 a game. That's not good. And in a shootout, you just need more. So I do hope to see better things, but it does come down to offensive line play and quarterback play as far as them being year 2 in a system or year 3 in the case of Johnson, who transferred from Louisiana with Napier to Gainesville. I do think they could be much better if we give them the right plan of attack around them and the O-line plays well and the quarterback play. Granted, when I mentioned Vandy and Tennessee last year, our quarterback threw for 300, 400 yards in those games, and we still weren't getting it done on the ground. So we'll have to figure that out. Billy Napier, SEC Media Days, talking about he's keeping his play calling duties, but there are things he knows he could get better at. Hopefully, it's finding ways to get both the running game and passing game going well at the same time so we don't have situations like that. Because when you have an inconsistent passing game like we did, the running game's off, then we're going to have problems. Moving to the quarterback position, I do think this year, at least right now, my prediction is the position will be slightly worse. Last year, AR was inconsistent. There were times he did things that were phenomenal, made excellent throws. There were times he made head scratching, bad throws, and it was what it was. One thing that he did have, though, was his legs made a difference more than many realize or maybe think they did. Example, in 2022, lots of pressure at times for the Gators. And as I'm unsure of the 2023 offensive line, there could be issues. And so, what I'm talking about with that is in 2022, Anthony Richardson was pressured 37.6% of the time he dropped back to pass. Wisconsin, who I've heard Gator fans talk about, well, their offensive line always let Mertz get pressured. He only against the Big Ten West got pressured 31.4% of dropbacks. That 6% is more significant than it sounds. And Mertz was also inconsistent last year. Maybe this offense with more play action, which is something Mertz thrived in, does make him play better. But we've got to tone down the amount of times he's pressured because he was not great under pressure last season. And to be honest, neither was Anthony Richardson. The difference was Anthony Richardson's ability to run off. That's not to say Mertz is a statue, but Anthony Richardson could make more things happen with his legs, such as a 45-yard touchdown run against Utah or an 81-yard touchdown run against LSU or 60 yards, although that one wasn't a scramble against A&M. I do think Mertz will pick up some runs on or some yards on some scrambles, but it's nowhere going to be as good as or as effective as what we saw from Anthony Richardson last year due to the freak nature of his body. Now, another thing I want to talk about is third down passing. There's a third down passing theory where Graham Mertz was only inconsistent last season because Wisconsin always put him in a bad position on 3rd and 8 throws or 3rd and 8 or more throws. That is true. He did have 50 throws of 3rd and 8 or more, and that is way too high. You don't want that for a quarterback, and that will make you inconsistent. The thing is, our offense last year did that 45 times, so only 5 times less with Anthony Richardson against better defenses. So we've got to be better at first and second down. And if we can do that, it'll make life so much better on Mertz. Mertz does have better weapons around him, from faster receivers to now you've got ETN and Johnson, and year 2, 3 of the system. You've got the tight ends, which I talked about being better. The only thing is, will the offensive line help them? because last year AR could extend plays with his legs. We saw a little bit of Mertz doing that in the spring game, but will Mertz being able to scramble, will it be as effective being a little bit slower? Defenses can close in a little bit faster on that. So until I see that line taking a big step forward, I think that's going to hurt Mertz and help him stay in that inconsistent around the Anthony Richardson range without the upside of at least 600 yards rushing and several touchdowns, as we saw from AR. With that said, just to go back, I do think our offensive line takes a step back this year. How much will remain to be seen. We may see some young guys step up as true freshmen, redshirt freshmen that show depth or come in and do really well. Like Austin Barber was kind of a surprise last year, but a very good surprise. I do think the tight end position will be better. I think the receivers have the chance to be better and the running backs have a chance to be better. It all comes down to, is the offensive line as good or better this year than they were last year? And is the quarterback play going to be more consistent? The thing that Mertz has that Anthony Richardson didn't have for sure is he has so much more experience in a starting role. He's played in some big games. Now he's going to play a lot better teams than he's faced before. So hopefully I'm wrong and the quarterback position does not take a step back. Is just the way I see it right now. And before we go, I want to go back to the last episode I did, which was the 2024 SEC opponent predictions. I got some right, got some wrong. So, for those of you who may not have heard, our 2024 SEC opponents have been announced. Our home opponents are LSU, which I got right, Kentucky, which I did not. I was going back and forth between Kentucky and South Carolina when making my predictions, and I went with Carolina because they were predicted permanent opponents. I was wrong. Ole Miss is the wrong Mississippi I had coming to Gainesville, but they will be here with Lane Kiffin in 2024. And to finish it out, we will have the Texas A&M Aggies. There is some complaints that Georgia still is not going to Kyle Field. To be honest, I'm not worried about it. We're acting like this is Alabama that they're avoiding. This is a team that's never been to the SEC title game. Are they a decent opponent? Yes, but they are what they are. I'm not complaining that Georgia hasn't been to whoever. It is what it is. They get Bama. So which would you rather have, A&M or Bama? I'd rather them go to Bama. And so away opponents, I was right that we do go to away, quote unquote, to Georgia and Jacksonville, and that we take a trip to Knoxville. I was right that we faced Mississippi State. I was just wrong about the location. I'll be happy to go to Starkville for the first time next year. And then speaking of for the first time next year, the Gators will be going to Austin. I will take partial credit because I said we'd face both new teams. We're only facing one, and I had one home, one away. So let me have this win. We are facing Texas in Austin next season. And so moving on, we are going to go ahead and call it a bit of an episode. Thanks everyone for listening. I know that it's been a long time in between games, and now games are coming up, and I know it's been very infrequent in my uploads. Thank you for still sticking with us. They will be more frequent next week. We will be back. I will be talking about the defense, and I do think a lot of this defense will be better, and I think that's going to help the Gators possibly be better in 2023. Once again, with all that said, thank you all for listening, and as always, go Gators.